I never imagined that turning my half-acre suburban lot into native prairie would land me in the middle of a legal battle with the most vindictive woman I'd ever met. But that's exactly what happened when I moved into Meadowbrook Estates in Springfield, Illinois. My name is Stephen Fitzgerald, and I bought the house on Willow Creek Drive in March of 2024. The place needed work, but the bones were good, and more importantly, the yard was a blank slate. The previous owners had let the lawn go to hell, which was perfect for my plans. See, I'd spent the last 5 years working as an environmental consultant, and I knew exactly what kind of ecological disaster the typical American lawn really was. Gallons of water wasted every week, pesticides leaching into groundwater, gas-powered mowers spewing emissions, and all for what? A green carpet that supported basically zero wildlife. I'd been researching prairie restoration for years, attending workshops at the Morton Arboretum, and connecting with the Illinois Native Plant Society. My plan was to transform my property into a thriving ecosystem of native grasses and wildflowers, the kind of landscape that once covered millions of acres across the Midwest before settlers plowed it all under. It would provide habitat for pollinators, birds, and beneficial insects. It would require no watering once established, no fertilizer, no pesticides. It was environmentally responsible, and honestly, I thought it would be beautiful. The HOA documents I'd received during closing mentioned maintaining a neat appearance, but nothing specific about lawns or grass height. I read through every page twice. There were rules about fence colors, restrictions on sheds, guidelines for holiday decorations, but the landscaping section was surprisingly vague. I figured I was in the clear. I started work in late April, right when the spring weather turned warm enough to get outside without a jacket. First, I had to kill off all the existing turf grass and weeds. I used a smothering technique, laying down cardboard and mulch over the entire half-acre, which looked admittedly ugly but was completely organic and effective. My neighbor to the left, an older guy named Bill, wandered over while I was working to ask what I was up to. Prairie restoration, I explained, straightening up from spreading mulch and wiping sweat from my forehead. Going to plant native species, better for the environment, better for wildlife. Bill nodded thoughtfully. That's different. Wife and I are thinking about doing something like that in the backyard. You'll have to let me know how it goes. I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. The first letter arrived in mid-May, just as I was preparing to begin planting. It was printed on official HOA letterhead, signed by Patricia Hendricks, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. The letter informed me that my neglected yard was in violation of community standards, and that I needed to restore proper landscaping within 14 days or face fines. I called the number listed at the bottom of the letter and got Patricia's voicemail. I left a polite message explaining that my yard wasn't neglected, that I was in the process of establishing a native prairie garden, and that I'd be happy to discuss it with her. She called back 3 hours later. "Mr. Fitzgerald, this is Patricia Hendricks." Her voice was clipped and cold. "I received your message, and I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. The HOA requires traditional landscaping, grass lawns, not whatever it is you're planning." "I reviewed the HOA documents thoroughly," I said, keeping my tone friendly. "There's nothing that specifically requires grass. The landscaping section just mentions maintaining a neat appearance." "The expectation of grass is implied," Patricia said. "Everyone else in this neighborhood has a proper lawn. We have standards here." "I understand, but prairie gardens are becoming increasingly recognized as environmentally beneficial landscaping. Once it's established, It'll be beautiful. Native wildflowers, grasses, it'll bloom from spring through fall. It'll look like a weed patch, Patricia snapped. I drive past your house every day on my way to work, and right now it looks like an abandoned lot. This is a respectable neighborhood, Mr. Fitzgerald. We don't allow eyesores. Give me a chance to actually plant it before making that judgment, I said, feeling my patience start to fray. I'm planning to put in over 40 native species. It's going to be stunning. You have 14 days to plant grass, or you'll be fined $50 per day, Patricia said flatly. Good day, Mr. Fitzgerald. She hung up before I could respond. I spent that evening researching Illinois HOA law, and was relieved to discover that HOAs couldn't just make up rules on the fly. They had to enforce the actual written covenants, not unspoken expectations. Since my project didn't violate anything specific in the HOA documents, I felt confident moving forward. The next weekend, I started planting. I'd ordered seeds and plugs from a specialty nursery that focused on Illinois native plants. Prairie dropseed, little bluestem, Indian grass for the grasses. Purple coneflower, black-eyed Susan, wild bergamot, rattlesnake master, butterfly milkweed, and about 30 other wildflower species. I worked dawn to dusk on Saturday, getting everything in the ground, then spent Sunday installing a simple split-rail fence along the front to give it a more intentional, landscaped look. My neighbor to the right, a woman in her 30s named Rachel, came over Sunday afternoon with her 7-year-old daughter. This is so cool, Rachel said, watching me water the newly planted plugs. Emma's been learning about pollinators in school. This is going to be amazing for butterflies, right? Absolutely, I said, grateful for the enthusiasm. Monarch butterflies especially need milkweed, and I planted 4 different species. Should see them here by summer. Emma's eyes went wide. Can I come watch the butterflies when they come? Anytime, I told her. Patricia drove by twice while we were talking, slowing down both times to stare at my yard. The second time, she rolled down her window. Rachel, I hope he hasn't talked you into ruining your yard too, Patricia called out. Rachel's expression went carefully neutral. Just being neighborly, Patricia. Patricia's gaze swept over my property with obvious disgust before she drove on. Don't mind her, Rachel said quietly once Patricia was out of earshot. She's been HOA president for 6 years, and she treats it like she's running a dictatorship. She tried to fine us last year because our house number plaque was the wrong shade of bronze. Seriously, dead serious. We had to go to arbitration. The covenant says bronze, but it doesn't specify a shade. We won, but it was a huge hassle. Great. I'd moved next door to an HOA tyrant. The second letter arrived 4 days later, informing me that I'd failed to comply with the previous notice, and that daily fines of $50 had begun accruing as of that morning. The letter also stated that I was required to appear at the next HOA board meeting on June 3rd to address my continued violations. I decided it was time to get serious. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes, a sharp woman named Jennifer Torres who practiced in Springfield. Her consultation fee was reasonable, and after I explained the situation and emailed her copies of all the relevant documents, she called me back within 24 hours. You're in the right, Jennifer said. The HOA documents don't mandate grass lawns, and Illinois law actually has provisions that protect native plantings. There's a statute that prevents local governments and HOAs from prohibiting native plants used for environmental purposes. I didn't know that, I said, feeling a surge of relief. Most people don't. It was passed a few years ago specifically because situations like yours were becoming common. HOAs would go after people for prairie gardens, vegetable gardens, anything that didn't fit their cookie-cutter aesthetic. The law put a stop to it. I'll draft a letter to the HOA explaining their legal position and demanding they rescind the fines. Thank you. I just want to be left alone to do something good for the environment. Unfortunately, people like Patricia Hendricks aren't motivated by environmental concerns. They're motivated by control, but we'll handle it. Jennifer's letter went out the next day via certified mail. I felt cautiously optimistic. That optimism lasted exactly 3 days until I came home from work to find a certified letter from the HOA's lawyer. They were rejecting Jennifer's interpretation, claiming that neat appearance gave them broad discretion to enforce aesthetic standards, and that my weed-infested yard violated those standards. The daily fines would continue, and they were prepared to place a lien on my property if I didn't pay. "They're bluffing," Jennifer said when I called her in a panic. "They know they're on shaky legal ground, but they're hoping you'll cave. Don't pay the fines. We're going to fight this properly." The HOA meeting on June 3rd was held in the community clubhouse, a bland building near the neighborhood entrance. I arrived 15 minutes early with a folder containing printouts of the Illinois native plant statute, photos of established prairie gardens from around the state, and a detailed planting plan showing every species I'd installed. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of chairs facing them. About 20 residents were scattered throughout the seats. Patricia sat in the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other board members I didn't recognize. She was exactly what I'd expected. A woman in her mid-50s with an angular face, severely styled blonde hair, and an expression that suggested she'd just bitten into a lemon. "We'll begin with old business," Patricia announced once the meeting officially started at 7 p.m. She worked through several mundane items, approving minutes from the last meeting, discussing the community pool's opening schedule, debating whether to repaint the clubhouse trim. Finally, 45 minutes in, she looked directly at me. "Now, we need to address a serious violation. Mr. Stephen Fitzgerald of 847 Willow Creek Drive has refused to maintain his property according to community standards. Mr. Fitzgerald, please come forward." I walked to the front, feeling everyone's eyes on me. Patricia gestured impatiently to a spot directly in front of the board table, like I was a student being called before the principal. "Mr. Fitzgerald, you've been notified multiple times that your yard is unacceptable," Patricia began. "You've accumulated fines totaling $1,400 as of today, yet you continue to refuse to plant grass and maintain a proper lawn. What do you have to say for yourself?" I took a deep breath. "I'm not refusing to maintain my property. I'm establishing a native prairie garden using indigenous Illinois plant species. It's environmentally beneficial. It will provide habitat for pollinators and birds, and once established, it will be beautiful and require virtually no maintenance. I have documentation here showing." "We don't care about your documentation," Patricia interrupted. "We care about property values. Your yard looks like an abandoned lot, and it's bringing down the value of every home in this neighborhood." "It's been planted for 3 weeks," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Prairie plants take time to establish. By midsummer, it'll be blooming. By next year, it'll be stunning. I have photos of mature prairie gardens that look." "Photos of other people's yards are irrelevant," Patricia said. "This board has an obligation to maintain standards." "I've already received complaints from multiple neighbors." "Who?" I asked, because my immediate neighbors have been supportive. Patricia's jaw tightened. "Complaints are kept confidential. The point is, your yard is unacceptable. And if you don't rectify the situation by June 15th, we'll be moving forward with legal action to place a lien on your property." "Actually, you won't," I said, pulling out the copy of the Illinois statute Jennifer had provided. Illinois law specifically prohibits HOAs from banning native plantings used for environmental purposes. I'm protected under state statute. I held up the document, but Patricia barely glanced at it. "Our attorney has reviewed that statute and determined it doesn't apply in this situation," Patricia said dismissively. "Your yard isn't a garden, it's neglect disguised as environmentalism." "Then I'll see you in court," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. "Because I'm not tearing out those plants and I'm not paying those fines." Patricia's face flushed. "This meeting is concluded. Mr. Fitzgerald, you'll be hearing from our attorney." I returned to my seat, and Patricia quickly moved on to new business, but I could feel her anger radiating from the front of the room. After the meeting ended, several residents approached me in the parking lot. "I think what you're doing is great," a man in his 40s said. "I'm Greg. Live over on Oak Street. Patricia tried to fine me 2 years ago for putting up a bird feeder she thought was ugly. She's on a power trip. I've been wanting to do something like your prairie garden in my backyard," a woman added. "I'm so tired of mowing. Can you send me information about the plants you used?" It turned out Patricia had made enemies throughout the neighborhood with her aggressive enforcement tactics. Over the next week, 3 people emailed me asking for prairie garden information, and 2 asked if Jennifer Torres was taking new clients. But Patricia wasn't backing down either. On June 10th, I received notice that the HOA was filing a lawsuit seeking to compel me to remove the prairie garden and pay all accumulated fines, which now totaled $2,000. Jennifer filed a countersuit challenging the fines and seeking a declaratory judgment that my garden was protected under state law. "This is going to take months," Jennifer warned me. "Maybe longer. Are you prepared for that?" "I don't have much choice," I said. "I'm not letting her bully me into destroying something that's ecologically valuable." "Good, because I think we're going to win, but it won't be easy." While the legal battle heated up, something unexpected happened. My prairie garden started to grow. By late June, the native plants had established enough that the yard no longer looked like a construction site. The grasses were 6 inches tall, the wildflowers were leafing out, and a few early bloomers, the pale purple coneflowers and yellow black-eyed Susans, were starting to flower. I came home one evening to find Emma, my neighbor Rachel's daughter, crouched at the edge of my yard watching something intently. "Mr. Fitzgerald, look," she whispered excitedly as I walked up. "There's a butterfly on your flowers." Sure enough, a monarch butterfly was perched on one of the milkweed plants, its orange and black wings brilliant in the late afternoon sun. "That's the first one I've seen this year," I said, genuinely thrilled. "Can I take a picture for my school project?" Emma asked. "Absolutely." Rachel came out a moment later and took several photos of Emma with the butterfly in the background. "This is really starting to come together," she said to me. "It's gorgeous." "Tell that to Patricia," I said wryly. "Oh, she drove by 3 times today, I counted." "She slows down every time, staring at your yard like she's willing it to burst into flames." Despite the legal stress, I was falling in love with my prairie. Every day brought new discoveries. I spotted goldfinches perching on the swaying grass stems, pulling seeds. A bumblebee nest appeared in the northwest corner. A song sparrow built a nest in a clump of little bluestem. The ecological value I'd hoped to create was materializing right before my eyes. On July 8th, Jennifer called with news. "The Illinois Environmental Council heard about your case. They want to file an amicus brief supporting you. This is bigger than just your yard now. This is about whether HOAs can override state environmental law. That's good, right? Very good. It means we have heavyweight environmental organizations backing us. It puts pressure on the HOA to settle. But Patricia wasn't interested in settling. At the July HOA meeting, which I didn't attend but heard about from Greg and other neighbors, she'd apparently gone on a 10-minute rant about troublemakers who think they're above the rules and environmental extremists attacking property values. By mid-July, my prairie was genuinely beautiful. The coneflowers were blooming in masses of purple and white. The black-eyed Susans formed golden drifts. The wild bergamot added splashes of lavender. The grasses, now knee-high, swayed in waves with every breeze. I spent my evenings sitting on my front porch with a beer, watching the light change and the pollinators work the flowers. It was the most peaceful I'd felt in years. Then, on July 22nd, something remarkable happened. I received a call from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. "Mr. Fitzgerald, this is Marcus Chen from Eidner's Division of Ecosystems and Environment. I'm calling because we've been following your situation with your HOA, and we're impressed with what you're doing. We have a state grant program for residential prairie restoration projects, and we'd like to offer you funding." I nearly dropped my phone. "I'm sorry, what?" "It's a pilot program we started this year to encourage native plantings on private property. We provide grants up to $5,000 for residential prairie restoration projects that meet certain criteria. Based on the photos and plant lists your attorney shared with the Illinois Environmental Council, your project qualifies. We'd actually like to use it as a model site." "This is incredible," I said, still processing. "What would the funding be used for?" "You could use it to expand the prairie, add educational signage, purchase additional native plants, whatever furthers the project's ecological and educational value. We'd also feature it in our promotional materials for the program. The goal is to demonstrate that urban and suburban prairie restoration is achievable and beneficial." "Yes," I said immediately. "Absolutely yes." "Excellent. I'll send over the paperwork. Oh, and Mr. Fitzgerald, the fact that you're fighting an HOA over this makes it an even better story for promoting the program. We want to show that native landscaping has legal protection and state support." After I hung up, I just sat there, grinning. Patricia Hendricks had tried to bully me into submission, and instead, the state government was giving me money and recognition. Jennifer was ecstatic when I told her, "This is perfect. This completely undermines their argument that your garden is harmful or reduces property values. The state is literally paying you to do this. I'm filing a motion to include this information immediately." The news got better. Marcus from Eidner asked if I'd be willing to let them bring media to my property for a press event announcing the grant program. The program was awarding grants to 15 homeowners across Illinois, and they wanted to do a big public rollout in late August. "Your case has already gotten attention because of the lawsuit," Marcus explained. "Environmental groups are watching it. This is a chance to show that Illinois supports ecological landscaping and won't let outdated HOA rules override environmental progress." I agreed, and on August 19th, my front yard became the backdrop for a press conference. Representatives from Eidner, the Illinois Environmental Council, the Nature Conservancy, and the Prairie State Conservation Coalition all showed up. Local news crews from Springfield, and even a reporter from Chicago came to cover it. I stood in front of my prairie, which was now spectacularly in bloom. The late summer flowers, ironweed, Joe Pye weed, goldenrod, asters created a riot of purple, pink, and gold. The grasses had reached their full height, some nearly 5 feet tall, and they rustled gently in the breeze. It was objectively gorgeous, and the cameras captured every detail. Marcus gave a speech about the importance of native plantings and announced the grant program. Mr. Fitzgerald's project demonstrates exactly what we hope to achieve. Native prairies like this support dozens of pollinator species, provide habitat for birds and beneficial insects, require no chemical inputs, and once established, are incredibly low maintenance. This is the future of sustainable landscaping. They presented me with a ceremonial oversized check for $5,000, and I gave a brief statement about why I'd started the project, and my hopes that other homeowners would consider native plantings. A reporter asked about the HOA lawsuit, and I answered carefully, not wanting to prejudice the legal case. I believe that environmental stewardship should be encouraged, not penalized. I'm hopeful that the courts will recognize that native plantings benefit everyone. The story ran on the evening news that night. Local man battles HOA over environmental prairie garden, receives state grant, was the headline. The footage of my blooming prairie was stunning, and the news anchors were uniformly supportive. The story got picked up by the Chicago Tribune and several environmental blogs. Patricia must have been apoplectic. I didn't hear from her directly, but I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was furious. According to Greg, she'd called an emergency board meeting the day after the press conference and insisted they double down on the lawsuit. She's making this personal, Greg told me. Half the board thinks they should drop it, but Patricia won't let it go. She keeps saying it's about principle. It's about control, I said. She can't stand that I didn't back down. The court date for the preliminary motions was set for September 15th. Jennifer was confident. They don't have a case, she said. You're in compliance with state law, you have state funding supporting your project, and the HOA covenants don't specifically prohibit what you're doing. The judge is going to see this as HOA overreach. The hearing was held at the Sangamon County Courthouse in Springfield. I took the day off work and met Jennifer outside the courtroom at 8:30 in the morning. Patricia was there with the HOA's attorney, a stern-looking man named Douglas Pierce, who had the demeanor of someone who wasn't particularly happy with his client's case. The hearing was in front of Judge Marilyn Kowalski, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. Jennifer presented our argument first, walking through the Illinois statute protecting native plantings, the vagueness of the HOA covenants regarding landscaping, and the state grant as evidence that my project served a legitimate environmental purpose. Your Honor, the HOA is attempting to enforce aesthetic preferences that have no basis in their written covenants, and that directly contradicts state environmental policy, Jennifer argued. Mr. Fitzgerald's prairie garden is not only legal, it's being held up as a model by the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. Pierce, the HOA's attorney, tried to argue that the native plant statute didn't apply because my front yard wasn't truly a garden but rather an uncontrolled weed patch. Judge Kowalski cut him off. Counselor, I've seen the photos submitted as evidence. I've also seen the news coverage. That is clearly a deliberately planned and maintained native planting, not a weed patch. Do you have any evidence that Mr. Fitzgerald's yard violates a specific written provision of the HOA covenants? Pierce shuffled through his papers. The covenant requires a neat appearance, Your Honor. The board has discretion to enforce that standard. Neat appearance is subjective, Judge Kowalski said dryly. And from what I can see, Mr. Fitzgerald's yard is neat. It's simply not a grass lawn. Is there anything in the covenants that specifically mandates grass? No, Your Honor, but the expectation. I'm not interested in expectations, counselor. I'm interested in what's actually written. Does the covenant mandate grass lawns? Yes or no? No, Your Honor. Then, on what legal basis is the HOA fining Mr. Fitzgerald? Pierce looked uncomfortable. The board's interpretation of community standards, Your Honor. Judge Kowalski leaned back in her chair. I'm ruling in favor of Mr. Fitzgerald. The HOA covenants do not specifically prohibit native plantings. Illinois law explicitly protects such plantings when used for environmental purposes, and the state of Illinois has provided grant funding supporting this exact project. The HOA's fines are vacated, and the HOA is ordered to cease all enforcement actions related to Mr. Fitzgerald's landscaping. Furthermore, I'm ordering the HOA to reimburse Mr. Fitzgerald for his legal fees. This case is dismissed. I felt a wave of relief so intense I nearly laughed out loud. Jennifer squeezed my arm, grinning. Patricia stood up abruptly. Your Honor, this is outrageous. The board has a responsibility to maintain property values. Judge Kowalski fixed her with a sharp look. Miss Hendricks, your personal feelings about Mr. Fitzgerald's landscaping choices are not a legal argument. The case is decided. If you believe the HOA covenants need to be amended to address landscaping more specifically, you can put it to a vote of the homeowners. But as the covenants currently stand, you have no authority to dictate what native plants a homeowner can cultivate on their own property. We're adjourned. Outside the courtroom, Jennifer and I stood in the hallway for a moment, letting it sink in. You won, Jennifer said. Completely. And the legal fee reimbursement is huge. That'll cover most of what you've spent fighting this. Thank you, I said. I couldn't have done this without you. You did it by being stubborn enough to stand up to a bully, Jennifer said. Patricia Hendricks has probably been steamrolling people for years. You're the first person who actually fought back and won. The victory felt sweet, but I knew Patricia wasn't going to take it gracefully. I was right. 2 days after the court ruling, I received a packet in the mail containing a proposed amendment to the HOA covenants. Patricia had drafted new language requiring traditional turf grass lawns maintained at a height of no more than 4 inches and prohibiting prairie plantings, wildflower meadows, or naturalized landscapes in front yards. The amendment required a vote of the homeowners. According to the HOA bylaws, it needed 60% approval to pass. Patricia scheduled a special meeting for October 1st to discuss and vote on the amendment. The meeting notice she sent out was nakedly biased, describing my prairie garden as controversial naturalized landscaping that some residents find objectionable, and claiming the amendment was necessary to preserve property values and neighborhood aesthetics. I wasn't going to take that lying down. With Jennifer's help, I drafted my own letter to every homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates. I explained the ecological benefits of native plantings, included photos of my prairie in full bloom, cited the state grant and Eidner's recognition, and pointed out that the proposed amendment would not only target my yard, but would also prevent any other homeowner from ever choosing environmentally responsible landscaping. This amendment is about one person's personal vendetta, I wrote. Patricia Hendricks doesn't like my yard, and she's trying to change the rules retroactively to force me to remove it. But this affects all of you too. Do you want the HOA dictating every aspect of your landscaping choices? Do you want to be forbidden from planting pollinator gardens, vegetable gardens, or anything else that doesn't fit one person's narrow vision of what a yard should look like? I hand-delivered the letter to every house in the neighborhood over the course of a week. It gave me a chance to talk to people, and I was surprised by how much support I found. Yes, There were a few residents who sided with Patricia, mostly older folks who preferred traditional landscaping, but the majority of people I spoke with were either supportive of my Prairie or at least opposed to giving the HOA more power to micromanage their property. Rachel helped me organize. "We need to make sure everyone shows up to vote," she said. "Patricia is going to pack the meeting with her supporters. We need people there who'll vote no." Greg spread the word among the residents who'd had their own run-ins with Patricia over the years. It turned out there were a lot of them. The October 1st meeting was the best-attended HOA meeting in Meadowbrook Estates history. The community clubhouse was packed, with every chair filled and people standing along the walls. Patricia looked pleased by the turnout at first, apparently assuming it meant support for her amendment. She opened the meeting with a long speech about the importance of property values and neighborhood standards. "We've allowed our community guidelines to become too vague," she said. "That vagueness has been exploited by individuals who put their personal agendas ahead of what's best for the neighborhood. This amendment simply clarifies what we all know has always been the expectation: proper grass lawns." When she opened the floor for discussion, hands shot up around the room. A man I didn't know stood up. "I've lived here for 12 years, and I've never had a problem with people's yards until you started going after Stephen Fitzgerald. His prairie garden is beautiful. I drive past it every day, and I think it's the best-looking yard in the neighborhood." Applause broke out. Patricia's expression tightened. Another woman spoke up. "I have a pollinator garden in my backyard with native plants. Would this amendment ban that too?" "The amendment applies to front yards," Patricia said stiffly. "Backyards would still be at the discretion of homeowners." "Why?" someone else asked. "If native plants are so terrible, why allow them in backyards but not front yards?" "Because front yards are what visitors and potential buyers see," Patricia said. "They affect property values." "Has anyone actually studied whether Stephen's yard affects property values?" Greg called out. "Because I haven't seen my property value drop. In fact, I had my house appraised last month and it's up 15% from last year." More applause. Rachel stood up. "I think what Patricia isn't saying is that this is personal. She doesn't like that Stephen stood up to her and won in court, so now she's trying to change the rules out of spite. That's not leadership. That's vindictiveness." The room erupted in a mix of applause and arguing. Patricia banged the gavel, her face flushed. "Order, we will have order," she glared at Rachel. "This is not personal. This is about maintaining standards." "Then why did you only propose this amendment after you lost in court?" Rachel shot back. I stood up. "I'd like to say something." Patricia looked like she wanted to refuse, but with everyone watching, she couldn't. "Fine. Mr. Fitzgerald, you have 2 minutes." "I moved to this neighborhood because I wanted to be part of a community," I said, looking around the room at the faces watching me. "I wanted neighbors, not adversaries. When I decided to plant a prairie garden, it was because I care about the environment, about supporting pollinators and native wildlife, about being a responsible steward of my little piece of land. I never intended to cause conflict." But Patricia decided that my choice to landscape differently than she preferred was somehow a threat. She tried to fine me thousands of dollars. She sued me. And when she lost in court because she had no legal grounds, she decided to change the rules retroactively. I paused, making eye contact with people around the room. This amendment isn't about property values or neighborhood standards. It's about control. Patricia wants to dictate exactly how you use your own property, even when what you're doing is environmentally beneficial and legally protected. If you vote yes on this amendment, you're giving the HOA the power to ban vegetable gardens tomorrow, or fruit trees next week, or any other landscaping choice someone on the board decides they don't like. Is that really the kind of neighborhood you want to live in? The applause when I sat down was louder than any before. Patricia called for the vote quickly, probably hoping to end the meeting before things got worse for her. Ballots were distributed, and people marked yes or no and dropped them in a box at the front. The counting took 15 minutes. Patricia and 2 other board members tallied the votes while the room buzzed with conversation. I tried not to get my hopes up, but I couldn't help feeling anxious. Even with all the support I'd heard, it only took 41% of homeowners to vote yes for the amendment to fail, but I didn't know how many people who weren't at the meeting had submitted proxy votes supporting Patricia. Finally, Patricia returned to the front table. She looked like she'd swallowed glass. "The votes have been tallied," she said, her voice tight. "Of 132 votes cast, 49 voted yes. 83 voted no. The amendment fails." The room erupted in cheers and applause. I felt Rachel hug me from the side, and people around me were clapping me on the back. Patricia banged the gavel furiously. "Meeting adjourned." She gathered her papers and walked out, her movements jerky with anger. After the meeting, at least 30 people came up to congratulate me and express their support. Several asked for information about starting their own native gardens. A couple admitted they'd been intimidated by Patricia in the past over minor issues and were glad someone had finally stood up to her. "You did a good thing," an elderly woman told me. "That woman has made this neighborhood miserable for too long." The next day, I received an email from 2 board members, Maria and Tom, letting me know that they were planning to call for a special election to replace Patricia as HOA president. They'd been frustrated with her authoritarian approach for a while, and the failed amendment vote had made it clear that the majority of homeowners were ready for new leadership. The election was held 3 weeks later. Patricia ran again, of course, but she lost badly. Maria, who promised a more collaborative and less heavy-handed approach to HOA governance, won by a landslide. Patricia sent one final letter to the HOA mailing list the day after she lost the election. It was a bitter screed blaming activist residents and environmental extremists for undermining community values. Most people ignored it. With the legal battle won, the HOA led by someone reasonable, and my prairie garden thriving, I finally felt like I could relax. The prairie was entering its autumn phase, with the grasses turning gold and bronze, the asters blooming in shades of purple and white, and goldenrod adding splashes of yellow. Migrating birds stopped to rest and feed, and I spotted more monarch butterflies fueling up for their journey to Mexico. The grant money from Eidner allowed me to expand the prairie into my backyard and add educational signage along the front. The signs explained what native prairie was, why it mattered ecologically, and identified some of the key plant species. Neighbors and people from other parts of Springfield started stopping by to take photos and ask questions. In November, Marcus from Eidner visited to document the project for the agency's annual report. He walked through the prairie, now dormant for winter but still beautiful in its way, taking notes and photos. "This exceeded our expectations," he said. "You've created a genuine ecosystem here." We've already had 36 inquiries about the grant program from people who saw the news coverage of your story. You're inspiring people. "I just wanted to do something good for the environment," I said. "I didn't expect it to become a whole thing." "The best advocacy is leading by example," Marcus said. "You showed that it's possible to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." In December, the HOA sent out a newsletter with a very different tone than Patricia's communications. Maria, the new president, included a feature about my prairie garden, highlighting the ecological benefits and encouraging other residents to consider native plantings. She also announced that the board was working on new landscaping guidelines that would be more flexible and explicitly allow environmentally beneficial landscaping choices, while still maintaining reasonable standards for property maintenance. I ran into Patricia once in the neighborhood after that, at the grocery store near Meadowbrook Estates in January. She saw me in the produce aisle and immediately turned and walked the other way. I didn't chase after her. There was nothing left to say. By spring of 2025, my Prairie was entering its second year, and the transformation was remarkable. The plants had established deep root systems over the winter, and when they emerged in April, they grew faster and fuller than the first year. By May, the Prairie was a lush, knee-high sea of green, and by June, it was blooming more prolifically than I'd dreamed possible. 3 other houses in Meadowbrook Estates had started native gardens, inspired by mine. Rachel converted half her backyard into a pollinator garden with my help, and Emma, her daughter, did her science fair project on native plants and won first place. Bill, my neighbor on the left who'd been interested from the start, hired a native landscaping company to install a full prairie garden in his front yard. Greg was planning one for the following year. The most gratifying moment came in late June when I was out front watering some newly planted areas, and a young couple slowed their car in front of my house. They rolled down the window. "Excuse me," the woman called. "We're looking at houses in this neighborhood. Is this really a prairie garden?" "It is," I said, walking over. "It's incredible," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "We've been wanting to do something like this. The fact that there's already one in this neighborhood makes us want to live here even more." Her husband nodded. "Can you tell us about the HOA? Are they okay with landscaping like this?" I couldn't help but smile. "They are now. It took some convincing, but they came around." After they drove off, I stood in my front yard, looking at the prairie I'd fought so hard to protect. The evening light was golden, catching the seed heads of the grasses and making them glow. A goldfinch perched on a purple coneflower, swaying gently. The air hummed with bees and other pollinators working the flowers. I'd bought this house wanting to make a difference, to create something meaningful and ecologically valuable. I'd succeeded beyond my expectations. Yes, I'd had to fight for it, had to stand up to bullying and intimidation and legal threats. But I'd won, and in winning, I'd changed not just my own yard but the culture of my entire neighborhood. Patricia Hendricks had tried to use the HOA as a weapon to enforce her narrow vision of suburban conformity. Instead, she'd inadvertently started a native landscaping movement in Meadowbrook Estates and lost her stranglehold on the community. The state of Illinois had backed me with grant money and public recognition. The courts had affirmed my right to landscape as I chose. And my neighbors, the people I actually had to live alongside day after day, had voted overwhelmingly to support diversity and environmental stewardship over rigid aesthetic control. As I walked back to my porch, I noticed a small group of monarch butterflies clustered on my milkweed plants, their orange and black wings vivid in the fading light. They'd traveled thousands of miles to be here, following ancient instincts and migration patterns. My little half-acre prairie was part of that larger story now, a tiny piece of restored habitat in a landscape that had lost so much. I sat on my porch steps and pulled out my phone to take a photo. Before I could, my phone buzzed with an email from Marcus at Eidner. The subject line read, "Meteor request national coverage." I opened it. A national environmental magazine wanted to do a feature story about residential prairie restoration, and the legal challenges homeowners faced from HOAs. They'd heard about my case and wanted to interview me and photograph my prairie for the article. "This story has resonated with people across the country," Marcus wrote. "You're helping change the conversation about suburban landscaping and HOA authority. Let me know if you're interested in participating." I looked up at my prairie, at the butterflies and bees and birds, at the gentle waving of the grasses in the evening breeze. I thought about all the other homeowners out there who might want to do something similar but were afraid of their HOAs, afraid of standing out, afraid of the fight. I typed back a quick reply. "Yes, let's do it." The fight with Patricia and the Meadowbrook Estates HOA was over, but the larger work of advocating for native plantings and environmental stewardship was just beginning. If my experience could help even one other person stand up for ecological landscaping, it would be worth it. I put my phone away and just sat there as the sun set, watching my prairie transform in the changing light, listening to the evening sounds of insects and birds, and feeling profoundly grateful that I'd been stubborn enough to fight for this beautiful, living, thriving piece of restored ecosystem. In the end, Patricia Hendricks had done me a favor, though she'd never see it that way. Her opposition had forced me to fight, and in fighting, I discovered a community of supporters I never would have found otherwise. I'd connected with state environmental agencies, with native plant advocates, with neighbors who became friends. I'd learned that standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, can inspire others to do the same. The prairie garden I'd planted had grown into something bigger than I'd imagined, not just ecologically but culturally. It had become a symbol of resistance against mindless conformity, a demonstration that individual choices could make a real environmental difference, and proof that bad HOA leadership could be challenged and changed. As darkness fell and the fireflies began to emerge, blinking their bioluminescent signals among the prairie grasses, I smiled. Tomorrow, I'd call that magazine back and tell them the whole story. I'd talk about native plants and pollinators and the importance of ecological restoration. But I'd also talk about standing up to bullies, about community organizing, about the power of state environmental law to protect individual choices. Patricia Hendricks had wanted to force me to tear out my prairie and plant a sterile grass lawn. Instead, she'd helped me create a movement. And that felt like the perfect ending to our conflict. She'd lost her position, her lawsuit, her amendment vote, and her control over the neighborhood. I'd gained a thriving prairie, supportive neighbors, state recognition, and a platform to advocate for environmental change. It was more than I'd hoped for when I'd first moved to 847 Willow Creek Drive and dreamed of transforming my yard into native prairie. It was vindication, victory, and the foundation for something that would outlast both me and Patricia. A small but significant restoration of the landscape that had once covered these Illinois plains now returned to life in one suburban front yard.